Good evening. My name is David Morris, and I'm the interim chair of the UAB Department of Physical Therapy. And on behalf of the department's faculty, I'd like to welcome you to the third annual Marilyn Gossman Lectureship for the Advancement of Physical Therapy. First on our agenda tonight, I'd like to acknowledge a few special guests. This year, we're celebrating 52 years of physical therapy education here at UAB. And we are pleased to have with us tonight the first PT to be hired at UAB and the individual who is responsible for initiating the UAB Physical Therapy Educational Program, Dr. Joan Bergman. Dr. Joan Bergman, would you stand up and be recognized? I'd also like to mention that the Department of Physical Therapy is instituting the Joan S. Bergman Pioneer in Alabama Physical Therapy Award, which will be presented annually to recognize individuals who have made significant and lasting contributions to advanced physical therapy practice, research, and/or education in the state of Alabama. We will be presenting the first award to Dr. Bergman at a smaller ceremony later. So congratulations. We're also pleased to have many current and former faculty members of the UAB Department of Physical Therapy here with us tonight. Would all of you please stand and be recognized? Yeah, that includes you, Dave. In order to endow this annual lectureship, we were charged to raise $100,000. Many individuals were responsible for helping us meet this goal, and we would now like to recognize all those individuals who contributed to this important effort. Please join us in thanking these individuals for their contributions. I'd also like to recognize Steve Foster, UAB PT alumnus. Is Steve here? I haven't seen him. But Steve has been named the 2016 UAB School of Health Professions Distinguished Alumnus. This is the highest honor awarded to prominent alumni who have achieved distinction through exceptional contributions to their professions. This award highlights the diverse talents, notable accomplishments, and extraordinary service of our alumni and is reserved for those with a history of excellence in their careers. Congratulations, Steve. We're very proud of you. I'd also like to thank members of our School of Health Professions External Relations Office, in particular Katie Adams, Amanda Sherman, and Kevin Storr, for helping us plan and conduct tonight's activities. Amanda's over there, and the other Amanda's here, right there. So please join me in thanking these talented individuals. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to recognize that our department suffered a tremendous loss this past January with the passing of our beloved Sharon Shaw, our department chair from 1998 until she retired in 2013. On January 25th, in this room, we honored Dr. Shaw with a celebration of her life, and it was quite a party. If you are unable to attend, you can view a video of the event on our department's website. I also wanted to mention that UAB, with financial contributions from many of our alumni and friends, endowed a scholarship in honor of Sharon that will be awarded to PT students who demonstrate a desire and aptitude for community service, something that was very important to Sharon. We expect to award the first scholarship this spring. Now, the reason we're here tonight. Marilyn Gossman joined the UAB Physical Therapy faculty in 1967. For the next 31 years, she touched the lives of thousands and fostered a legacy worthy of the endowed lectureship created in her honor. We've created a short video describing Marilyn's contributions to UAB and the physical therapy profession.
Marilyn Gossman was a physical therapist, educator, researcher, and influential leader. She served as chair of the UAB Physical Therapy Department for more than 30 years. Along with Joe Clellan and Kara Adams, she grew the program into one ranked among the 20 best in the country. Marilyn was known for leadership, vision, and innovation. UAB was among the first to establish an assistance program, a post-professional master's degree, and an entry-level master's degree in physical therapy.
Well, Marilyn was a visionary, and she was always thinking of the future. And she had a real gift for seeing possibilities when other people didn't.
In 1998, Marilyn died of breast cancer, but her legacy lives on today through the hundreds of students and faculty members whose lives she touched. And it is her UAB family that is continuing her legacy of excellence and innovation by establishing the Marilyn R. Gossman Endowed Lectureship.
A lot of our current students don't really know who she is or what she did. So by doing this type of an effort, we are going to make sure that everyone knows the contributions that she made and the mark that she made on the profession, not only in Alabama, but throughout the U.S.
Your generosity proves that if you give something, you can change everything. Thanks to you, the PT department raised more than $100,000 and endowed the Gossman Lectureship. Guided by Marilyn's legacy of giving back and due to your generosity, UAB will host a renowned therapist every year to give a free, open to the public lecture. In line with Marilyn's forward vision and UAB's aspirations, the Gossman Lectureship will forever share knowledge that will change your world.
Now I'd like to welcome Dr. David Brown up to introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you. It's a great honor for me to be able to introduce tonight's Marilyn Gossman lecturer. It's Dr. Steve Wolf, physical therapist with a Ph.D. And currently Dr. Wolf is a professor in the Division of Physical Therapy. He's which is in the Department of Rehab Medicine and the Department of Medicine, as well as an associate professor in cell biology. And what these types of appointments tell us is that Dr. Wolf really cuts across different disciplines. He's ultimately a physical therapist, but he reaches out to other disciplines, tries to collaborate with other disciplines. I first met him in 1983 when I graduated from Duke, got in a car with my dad, drove down to Atlanta and started my first job as a physical therapist at Emory. And from there, when I met Dr. Wolf, I realized that this was a change agent, an individual who was visionary, was going to make changes for the profession of physical therapy. What I didn't realize back then, 1983, 33 years ago, is that he would continue to do that at a committed, hard-hitting level for the rest of that career, up until now, when he's still making great visionary changes and leadership, taking on a great leadership role within the profession. So I'm very proud to be introducing him tonight, and I hope you share in the vision that he's going to offer us tonight, because we need this type of change agent in our profession. So Dr. Wolf, thank you for coming here, and we're interested in your talk.
Well, thank you for the kind words, David, and thank you for the invitation. It is an honor indeed to be here to celebrate this very special occasion. I've entitled this talk, "The Road Ahead, the View is So Much Better When You're at the Front of the Pack." I'd like to think that that attitude characterized Marilyn Gossman, her life and her vision for our profession. And it's in that spirit that I'm going to move this talk forward. So fundamentally what we are talking about is change. And change has a variety of definitions based upon your perspective. So I want to share a few of those with you. You must welcome change as the rule, but not your ruler. Time is a dressmaker specializing in alterations. Things do not change, we change. Our only security is our ability to change. The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. Change is inevitable, except from a vending machine. Time and tide wait for no man. Can you swim? And my favorites, you must welcome change as the rule, but not your ruler. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself or herself. And last, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So we are at a point in our evolution where change needs to be embraced. And what I'm going to try to convince you of this evening is that we are those individuals who work in collaboration with our communities and our colleagues elsewhere to induce such changes for the betterment of mankind, but most importantly, for the betterment of the patients that we serve. So who defines the future? I think we do, both from a clinical and a research perspective. Certainly our consumers do. External sources, insurance carriers, funding agencies, those that have impact upon our livelihoods, no matter what capacity those livelihoods share. Combination of those based upon the versatility that any one of us has in the provision of services as physical therapists. But most importantly, and what I want to try to convince you of, is to pose the question, are we prepared to listen and to act? And this presentation tonight is going to revolve around this whole notion of us as change agents with open minds, willingness to embrace present and future developments. So let me tell you a few words about my friend Marilyn Gossman. I knew her in a different capacity than some of you in this room. This is a picture of Marilyn becoming a fellow of the American Physical Therapy Association, accompanied by Geneva Johnson in 1991. So what can we say about Marilyn? Let me give you my perspectives. I think, as Dave already referred, she was indeed a visionary. She saw things as they could be and as they would be in the future. What gave her the credentials to act that way? Let me share a couple of things that I don't think were mentioned in the video. Indeed, she did get her PT degree from Case Western in 1965. But as hard as it might be for some of you to fathom, her commitment to knowledge and provision of new information to us as therapists resulted in her getting her Ph.D. degree almost 20 years later, after serving many years in the capacity as a professor and leader in this department. She did work during that time at Washington University, interested in muscle biomechanics, was fortunate enough to receive funding from the Arthritis Foundation and from the Health Promotion from the CDC. And from 1968 onward, she received funds to support the training of future physical therapists to the amount of in excess of $2 million, something that perhaps some people don't realize. Besides 12 publications, she was a member of 7 different sections of the American Physical Therapy Association, beginning in 1965 and onward. Most remarkable, I believe this is true, she's the only person I know of who served on the APTA Board of Directors for 2 sequenced terms, each of 8 years. 16 years of her life in a leadership role for the entire profession that transcends her activities here at UAB. She also held 19 different consultantships, and as an indication of her commitment to UAB, was on 16 different UAB committees. So there's no question about her dedication to the profession and her dedication to this institution. But she saw things as they could be, not necessarily as they are. She was inspirational to many of her students and faculty colleagues who tried to emulate as best they could the very thing she stood for. She was tenacious in her beliefs and quite vocal in expressing them, usually with nothing more than the best of the profession at heart. And she was indeed a most articulate spokesperson. Together, this creates an acronym for what one might call vital, and she was indeed a vital force for our profession, and one that I hope you all, students and faculty alike, can appreciate. Her contributions to our professional livelihood and advancement spoke to her vision, her inspiration, her tenacity, her articulation, and most importantly, her love of this profession. So I would dedicate this conceptualization to her, and would like to believe that perhaps if she were here today, she would believe in much of what I have to say, and would be sitting here in a very acknowledging mode. And perhaps if she was with us, maybe it would be her giving this presentation today and not me. So what do I want to accomplish in the next 35 minutes? What I'd like to do is offer you a historical perspective regarding changes in the direction of neurorehabilitation research and training, and the importance and rationale underlying such changes, and discuss future developments that are occurring right now and will continue to occur that I believe will influence not only our practice but our interaction with other disciplines in 4 particular areas: genomics, regenerative rehabilitation, bioengineering, and telerehabilitation. And those are not randomly picked areas. They have been evolved from an evaluation of the profession that I'll get to shortly. In fact, some of you may know that as a mandate from the House of Delegates of the APTA in 2006, there was a call for an external review of the profession by what amounted to 26 different disciplines, both federal and private, consumer groups, to evaluate their perceptions of what the future of physical therapy and physical therapy practice should be. That was to be implemented by 2009 with a report of the outcome of such a meeting by June of 2009 as a report to the House of Delegates of the American Physical Therapy Association. PASS is an acronym for Physical Therapy and Society Summit. There are a host of us who agreed to serve on the steering committee to help organize that meeting, but with a caveat that we had control over all of the dissemination of information that came from that experience and not the board of directors of the APTA. The last thing we wanted was for that valued information to become shelved, as is so often the case with acts that have been completed but no longer survived. So as a result of this meeting, we were able to disseminate several publications and keep the dream alive, as well as the recommendations that I will share with you in just a moment. So what we're asked to do is to revisit the interface between practice, education, research, and technological advances. What this external review asked us to do was to create mechanisms that allow physical therapists to become familiar and stay contemporary with real and virtual technologies, to promote the translation and integration of technology and science, and to foster collaborations with engineering, industry, and others. Now, mind you, these are not physical therapists talking. These are representatives from other areas who are looking to the future after evaluating our Vision 2020 statement and other aspects of their knowledge of the profession. So the past recommendations included that there was a need for us to become less personally centric and more consumer centric, to eliminate the silos of segregation between research, education, and clinical practice, to serve as advocates for leadership in prevention and health and wellness, something that's being heralded at this institution as a leader for the United States, I might add. Lead in establishing societal determinants of health, and importantly, collaborate in developing and providing leadership in the testing and applications of new technologies and approaches to optimize healthcare delivery. So at this point, what can we say? We've done all right. Can we afford to rest on our laurels? I think not. Can we afford to see things as we want them to be and not as they really are? I don't think so. Or do we want to rejoice in opportunities that await us? And I would submit to you that this is what we want to do. And to take the challenge with a smile and with a determination that will place us as leaders in healthcare provision for decades to come. So what this group of external reviewers said to us is that there are at least 4 areas that we are deficient in that are relevant to the future of our profession: genomic rehabilitation interfaces, regenerative rehabilitation, bioengineering, specifically sensing technology such as robotics and virtual reality, telehealth, and that there was a need for us to advance our knowledge in those areas within our profession and by seeking collaborations with those outside our profession, and therein breaking down some of the existing silos. So some of the questions that this brought to bear as a result of these recommendations are the following, and I ask us all to think about these pretty seriously. Do our educational programs prepare us adequately to absorb and use information relevant to an understanding and application of emerging sciences? I'm not quite sure we can say that throughout our country. Is our exposure in the classroom and clinic too limited? Might there be others with whom we should be interfacing in those environments? Is there a need to think outside the box and work with scientists, educators, and clinicians who represent cutting-edge discoveries in molecular science, cellular science, behavioral therapies, technological advances, and electronic communications? I hope that the students in the room would agree that those are important considerations because they help form the cornerstone of the manner in which you have been educated to date and which all of your successors will be educated. Immediacy of information that is relevant to what you're going to do with patients, and an ability to acquire that information across disciplines in a timely and meaningful manner. And if, and by chance, these individuals are sensitive to our needs, that's great. But if they're not, what responsibility do we have to make them behave so? What proactivity should we engage in to work collaboratively with those outside the immediacy of physical therapy? And most importantly, how significant do you feel these queries might be in helping shape our role in healthcare delivery and service? Now, this is a slide not generated by me, but it's generated about 4 years ago by the American Physical Therapy Association. And whether by chance or design, it happens to encompass the very things I just said to you, which I interpret to mean an endorsement of sorts on the part of our profession, that these content areas are valued and valuable. So indeed, they were recommending that the APTA in some manner generate podcasts in these areas, websites and resources, educational opportunities, and collaborations, all governing these 4 areas and others, and to engage our sections, our specialty sections within the APTA to embrace these kinds of ideas. But the question arose, just how are we going to do that? Now remember, I said that the steering committee that oversaw the past meeting did so with the caveat that we could distribute information about that meeting. That was, by the way, didn't say this, the report to the House of Delegates was endorsed unanimously by the entire House. And we used that to leverage the importance of our future and having acknowledgement from the APTA that these areas needed to be pursued. So as a result of that, we took it upon ourselves to create working groups of both PTs and non-PTs who, from 2012 on, have donated their time to create information bases in these 4 content areas. And we gave ourselves the acronym, the FIRST initiative, FIRST for Frontiers in Rehab Science and Technology. And we missioned ourselves to define informational bases that could be electronically accessible, create avenues of relevant information dissemination that presently did not exist, identify mechanisms to update and perpetuate this effort, devise a plan that will be endorsed by educators and clinicians, and to undertake these in an effective and time-efficient manner. We presented these ideas to all the education leaders of PT programs in the United States. And conceptually, the ideas were endorsed unanimously. Probably because we were not singling out any one particular educational program. This was not an effort designed for Research One institutions. It was an effort designed to create informational bases for all physical therapists who are members of the APTA and all educational departments. Well, clearly, not every educational department, and I would dare say including this one, has experts in all of these areas. Probably we won't. But I ask you, somewhat rhetorically, should this prevent us from moving forward? And I would submit to you, as I mentioned to some of the students this morning, I know of no law or rule that says in the education of physical therapy students, a physical therapy student must be in the classroom exclusively with other physical therapists and not folks from other disciplines. Nor do I know of any rule that says part of your education can't be given to you by those outside the immediacy of this discipline. And I'm not just talking about an exercise physiologist who might be available to teach you something about exercise. I'm talking about molecular scientists, geneticists who help create the relationship between genomic discoveries and their implications for rehabilitation. Those are the kinds of inquiries that I think we need to make. And in a few moments, I'm going to show you some fairly startling figures that speak to the rate of knowledge acquisition in these areas over the course of the last few years. So we have created, as I said, these 4 content areas. Telehealth is being led by Alan Lee, who's a physical therapist at Marymount University in Los Angeles. Judy Deutsch from Rutgers and Randy Trumbauer from Emory, who are leading the START, sensing tools and rehab technology portion of this. Jeff Klein, a neuroscientist from Arizona State University, and Alan Goldberg, who are leading the genomic rehabilitation interfaces. And Fabi Ambrosio from the University of Pittsburgh, who's leading the regenerative rehabilitation initiative. Each of these individuals, or pairs, already has a minimum of 10 people on their team. So that's over 40 PTs and non-PTs who have and continue to devote their time gratis to building up the database in terms of publications, webinars, podcasts, and other vehicles that are available on the APTA homepage. The difficulty I think we're having is, at this point, is that the IT services for the APTA leave a little bit to be desired in terms of easy access to some of this information. So let me give you an example of what I mean by all of this. And this is where the cool part starts. So, as I said to the students this morning, you're listening to all of this stuff, and basically the most fundamental question you can ask is, who cares? Why would I want to know? Give me an example of what this means. So here we go. I'm going to give you an example in regenerative rehabilitation. Perhaps the most popular example that you may have heard about deals with the Intrepid program in San Antonio, where stem cells are being laid down on scaffolding that promotes the proliferation of muscle cells to create muscle that's integrated into existing muscle among veterans, soldiers who have lost muscle mass because of war injuries. And this is turning out quite well, and it's very exciting. But what I want to show you is some work that one of my colleagues, Randy Trumbauer, who I mentioned earlier, has been doing. I'll give you an example here. This is a pretty busy picture, but you see a rat walking on what appears to be a ladder, and you're looking at from a top. Well, if you ask a rat to walk across a ladder from one point to another, it will do so, especially if there's a food reward at the other end, and it won't make any mistakes at all. In this case, the rat has sustained an induced cervical spinal cord injury. And what is monitored here is the number of missteps as it goes across the ladder grid. And that's represented in the black bars. These black bars are done prior to the induction of the injury, immediately after, and then sequentially over the course of 5 days of treatment and then a follow-up. The larger the black bar, the more errors in walking. But you'll also see there's a gray bar. And what Randy has discovered, based upon literature is that these animals were given intermittent hypoxia. What does that mean? Instead of breathing regular air, they were breathing air with 11% oxygen content. And apparently, that air serves as a neurostimulant within the spinal cord, the central nervous system, to promote change. And what you see here in these animals who are given intermittent hypoxia, those are the gray bars, that the number of errors that occur subsequent to the lesion and during each of those sessions of intermittent hypoxia lead to fewer and fewer errors, and the reduction in those errors are retained over time. Let's apply this to the human condition, spinal cord injury. In this case, the paradigm, the protocol is such that patients who've had cervical cord injuries that are quadriparetic, that means they can move their limbs, but they can't really walk too well independently, are either given regular air or intermittent hypoxia 1 day, 2 days, through 5 days of treatment. Let's go back. And then the follow-up at 8 days and 15 days. That's the paradigm. Neither the lab, the people in the lab, nor the patient knew whether they were getting intermittent hypoxia or continuous regular air. So what happens to spinal cord injured patients who go through this paradigm? That's depicted in this very busy slide here. Let me kind of take you through this. If you're looking at the upper left-hand graph, what we're looking at here is the ability of a spinal cord injured patient to open their hand to grasp a ball of various sizes. The bars on the left of that upper left-hand corner are the sham or false condition, where it turns out the patients were getting regular air all the time. And as you can see, negative going bars indicate an inability to increase the aperture or opening of their hand, irrespective of the size of the ball that they're reaching. On the right there in that upper left-hand corner are the data from those who received intermittent hypoxia, where the upward bars indicate greater hand opening. Clearly, the ability to open the hand across a group of 12 or 15 spinal cord injury patients increased with intermittent hypoxia. The lower left is the Jepson-Taylor test for upper extremity function, a series of functional tasks which are time-based. In this case, the minus signs, the lower direction indicates faster, less time to complete the tasks. And in this case, you can see that there's a little bit of improvement in the sham group on the left, but the group that received the intermittent hypoxia reduced their time, got faster, significantly greater than did the sham group. The upper right-hand corner indicates a test that some of you may have seen and others will, a box-to-block test, where you have to pick up blocks and put them in a box, and your time for doing that for over the course of a minute. And once again, in this case, upper bar is faster, more blocks per unit of time. And again, those who received intermittent hypoxia, the far right of the upper right hand, showed significantly faster, increased numbers of blocks they could move versus those in the sham condition. And the lower right is grip strength, where an upper bar indicates more strength in the hand. The point to be gleaned from here is that something is going on in the presence of intermittent hypoxia, which drives the nervous system to greater function in the presence of intermittent hypoxia. And what's being explored now is the mechanism. So this is some kind of regenerative change that has to be happening somewhere in the nervous system. And what we're studying now are potential blocking agents of neurotransmitters that help us weed out what the neural paths are that may be contributing to this success. So this is a nice example of applying an agent, intermittent hypoxia, in a double-blind study to show improvements in functional tasks. And also not shown here is that these patients are able to walk at faster walking speeds than they had intermittent hypoxia. This is simply to demonstrate one more piece of information, as you see what the size of these balls look like. We also monitored muscle activity and in the forearm muscles of an upper extremity while individuals reached. And I'm not quite sure how much information you all have had, students, about EMG or muscle activity, suffice to say that if you're asking someone to reach forward, raise their wrist up to grasp something, if the muscles on both sides of the wrist are contracting at the same time, co-activation, it stiffens the wrist joint and makes it harder to position the wrist to acquire and capture one of these balls. As it turns out, the ratio, the relationship of muscle activity between those muscles which raise the wrist up and those muscles which lower the wrist changes. So they don't become as co-activated as they were before. Those muscles which raise the wrist up get more active, and those muscles that are trying to resist that happening, the ones that bend the wrist down, become less active. So clearly there are changes going on in the relationships of muscles that are functionally relevant to a task, in this case reaching forward to grasp the ball. Some more examples. I'll show you one in a few minutes of a project we're doing right now in bioengineering. There are a variety of robotic devices that are being studied. We are studying a telehealth project that involves home applications and communications between patients in their home and the therapist in the clinic as the patients are learning to reuse their upper extremity post-stroke in a gaming mode. More about that later. We've finished a series of studies in collaboration with Arizona State University in which we've used the arts and music to re-educate the upper extremity of individuals who've had strokes in something we call mixed reality, where the movements of the patient's upper extremity drive a picture, a scenario, a series of illustrations, the distortion of which is related to the inaccuracies of the kinematics of their upper extremity. And their job is to make the picture clear again and go through a scenario. The music part of this relates to notes that they hear, the frequency of which and the pitch is related to the smoothness of the movement. So they're getting auditory cues about the velocity of their motion and the direction of their motion, while at the same time they're seeing a visualization of the scene that's related to the movement. In this case, this mixed reality leads to substantial improvements in kinematics, because one of the things we did is we monitored 44 different kinematic parameters simultaneously in an effort to give us some information about quality of movement of the upper extremity. As therapists, one of the things we're pretty good at is quantifying things: strength, range of motion, time, activities. But what we are lousy at is assessing in a valid way quality of movement. We try to get people to restore their function as best we can rather than teach compensatory behaviors. What this mode allowed us to do is to determine which parameters of movement are the poorest relative to a normal population, so that as therapists, given that information, we can begin to hone in on those aspects of quality of movement that need to be addressed therapeutically that we might not be able to detect visually when we work with a patient. It's trying to improve our ability to differentiate qualitative aspects of movement. Genomics. What we're seeing more and more of is the discovery of aberrations or differences in the genetic makeup of different gene pools that represent specific aspects of who we are. One of the big examples in neurorehabilitation is a genetic polymorphism called a SNP that detects changes or differences in the proliferation of brain-derived nerve growth factor, BDNF. As it turns out, both in animal models and in human models, this polymorphism that has to do with a veil-met bonding in a gene sequence is present in 25% of the population. The manifestation of that is that when you try to learn or relearn a movement, that ability is potentially impaired. So the question, if you do an intervention to try to help folks, and you do a buccal swab from which you can extract an indication of the presence of that polymorphism, what's the relationship between the presence of the polymorphism and the performance and change of performance when we provide intervention to a patient. We've just finished doing that in a large national stroke study, and we have data from 361 stroke patients seen through the different locations in the United States. And what we're doing right now, since none of us know the relationship between the buccal swab data and the performance of the patients who are in the study, determining, is there a relationship between the presence of the polymorphism and how well the patients did with the specific intervention for improving upper extremity function following stroke? What this heralds is the opportunity to embrace and interface genomic discovery with therapeutic interventions. And some of you may know about some of the existing toys that are available, such as 23andMe, which claim to be able to lay out your entire genomic structure from just a contribution of saliva. The validity of that is somewhat questionable, but the reality is that within 10 years, if you so desire, we will all know our genomic makeup. There's a lot that's scary to some people. There's a lot that's potentially beneficial. So I'm saying this to you because in your working generation time, people may very well come to you with a genetic disposition. And that person may have an impairment of some sort you're being asked to examine. And they're going to want to know what the relationship is between their polymorphisms for that particular process and what you're going to do for them. Another example, pharmacokinetics. Cycloserine D is a drug that's often used to bronchodilate in individuals who have asthma. Turns out that its application also is, facilitates relearning in individuals who have stroke. So the question we're now posing and studying is, does the administration of cycloserine D in the presence of a therapeutic training improve functional outcomes in relearning to use an impaired upper extremity more than a placebo and the training? So this is an example of a pharmacokinetic therapeutic interface, and we're going to be seeing more of those. For those of you who are interested in women's health initiatives, turns out that there is an agent that can induce genetic changes called morphogenic protein 2. And what morphogenic protein 2 does is to lay down osteoblasts in bone. This is particularly relevant and potentially relevant for women with osteoporosis. Does the induction of more cancellous bone lead to stronger bone? Well, that's interesting. So what does that have to do with us? So what's going to happen now when these geneticists come to us and say, all right, I put my patient on this. I want her to be stronger, better weight bearing. Are you going to provide the same strengthening exercises under this condition that you would do normally? And I would submit to you, we have no idea. But the point is, this is an example of how we take contemporary information and we'll have an obligation to figure out how we're going to apply that information to the very things that we do routinely now. So let me give you some data that's a bit startling. This is from a series of PubMed searches. Let's start with genomics. And genomics can be broken down into 20 different categories. And what you see here are searches and the dates in which they were done, and they're color-coded. So if we look at, let's just say, functional genomics, in June of 2012, there are about 15,000 studies. By September of 2013, 20,000. And by February of 2016, 29,000. These are the kinds of studies I've just talked to you about. Regenerative rehabilitation. Between 1978 and 1990, there were only 5 studies. 90 to 2000, 18, 2000 to 2010, 131. And since 2012 to now, 487. To give you a sense of the rate of proliferation of information, much of which I would argue is relevant or will be relevant to what we do as physical therapists. So going back to the original questions I posed, to what extent does this informational base dictate the need for us to learn more than we might be learning in our classroom today. Telerehabilitation, data from 2014, data from 2016, and you can see that if we just look at home telehealth as one of the categories, as of February of 2016, there are 2,848 articles that were identified. And since 2010, 1,185 of those have been published. So 41% of all papers written in telerehabilitation have occurred in the last few years. Give you a sense of the rate of growth of this knowledge. So a telerehabilitation study I referred to, this is one that's ongoing right now. And what you can see in this screen is a setup in which the patient is being instructed in how they're going to use various gaming to increase the mobility of their upper extremity when they go home, because this setup is identical to the one they'll be put in their home. And the question we're asking right now is part of a national stroke network study in telerehabilitation that's being done at 8 different sites around the United States with identical setups, is if the therapist trains the patient in a home-based situation for a total of 36 to 32 sessions, half of the time they're working with them one-on-one for defined periods over telerehab, and half of the time the patient is working on their own, so that each week for 6 weeks, there are 3 sessions of home practice by the patient on their own, and 3 where the therapist is communicating through telerehab. Can the improvements be equivalent, not superior, but equivalent between the 2 conditions? So who cares? Well, it seems to me that if we're going to move towards a telerehab mode where patients can do work in their home and be instructed one-on-one vis-a-vis the clinic, we have to demonstrate that it's comparable to usual care. So if it isn't, then we may have to rethink about this telerehab. But I would submit to you that the expectations of your contemporaries and those that follow you is that there ought to be some direct communication that's electronically transmissible between a home environment and the clinic for the patients to improve, and that they don't necessarily have to come in each time to be seen. It's a cost savings, especially in catastrophic injury, and this is something that needs to be explored further. This is just another view of that. And the alternative is the usual care, which you see on the right there, where this particular patient, who had been a hairdresser, is now doing functionally related activities one-on-one with the therapist that are meaningful to that patient. So before I close, let's discuss about some of the realities that exist right now. Indeed, there still are generational and interdisciplinary differences. I remember quite vividly as we were doing our last study, a robotics study in which we put a robotic device in the home of patients who live in rural areas and don't have access to immediate care. We instructed and we asked the question, is the robotic training comparable to home visits? And several times, we captured this on video, the patients were unable to interface with the robotic device and to transmit the information that was coming from the robotic device via a modem back to the clinic. And the reason is because they don't know how to work computers. And we captured the frustration between the caregiver, who happened to be the patient's son, and the patient, because the son was getting impatient with the fact that his father wasn't getting it. And that's a very dramatic example of the difficulties, at least in the last generation, of using some of contemporary tools to effect meaningful changes. I want to leave you with something we're doing now, and I think portends the future. I made reference to the importance of different learning conditions. We at Emory have created a course as an elective for the last year of last semester of the PT program called Interdisciplinary Integrating Physical Therapy and Bioengineering. In this course, bioengineering students and physical therapy students are in the same classroom at the same time. And what they do is they get to see a series of patients. And we put them in teams of DPT students and bioengineering students. And they evaluate the patients, and then they have to decide, based upon their communication with the patients, what might they be able to do for those patients that the patient and family unit feel are needed in terms of an equipment modification, a new tool, and create that opportunity. They all, separate teams, decide which question they're going to answer. And then they work separately in pairs. They write up their proposal as though it's an NIH preliminary study grant. And then when it's all done, we give them bogus data, because we don't have time to collect the data, that they have to analyze and then make a report. In this case, it's not us, the faculty, who critique the reports, the students critique each other's. And when asked, why do we have to write a grant proposal in this experience, we tell them it's not to make you researchers, but it's to make you learn how to express yourselves clearly, articulately, because whether you want to do research or you're going to be a therapist in the clinic, there comes a time where you're going to have to petition or ask for something. And you better be able to write for yourself clearly and compelling in order to get what it is that you're asking for. And that's the beauty of the exercise. The last, and perhaps most important thing, is to foster an ability to communicate with one another well before we've graduated, so that we can honestly communicate in such a way that we won't be intimidated by talking with people from another discipline. We'll be able to talk more freely with one another. An example, when we talk about stiffness, we often talk about joint stiffness. Stiffness to a bioengineer is a very different context. And if we don't have these discussions, we don't know what each is talking about. So if we can break down the barriers to communication and work more cohesively, even in the student capacity, I think our ability to work collaboratively in engineering constructs, once we are out in the field, will be enhanced considerably. So I don't know how much of this you can see, but it's a little bit about the curriculum for this course. So let me summarize it for you. Over the course of 15 weeks, the students, as I said earlier on, they get introduced to the course. They meet patients that we arrange for them, usually those with catastrophic injuries, TBI, spinal cord injury, stroke. And they begin their planning for what they want to do by interviewing the patient and the patient family unit. In addition, we have specific didactic information for them, like how to generate and apply for patents, bioethical issues in working with patients with new devices and what is and is not permissible, and specific training on contemporary and new robotic devices, in which the engineering students quiz the PT students on the application, and the PT students quiz the engineering students on the relevance of what it is they want to build, so that we foster a more meaningful communication. So when the students get graded, the way they get graded is 10% is based upon a journal review that each student has to do, 30% on the challenges that one team has, 30% on their ability to critique the challenges from another team, a final exam, which is basically their paper and their presentation, for a 100% grade. This is a distribution of the students that have participated in this over the course of the first few years of our work. 34 students thus far, with a very nice mix of DPT students, Georgia Tech students from applied physiology, Georgia Tech students from bioengineering. And this has worked out very nicely, and the course seems to gain more popularity with each year. One example, 2 years ago, one team decided that they wanted to explore the relatively new Google glasses at that time and create a scenario in which they asked the question, can you walk a stroke patient over a terrain? It could be a gate right, it could be a regular terrain. Put sensors on the ankles of each extremity, transmit the loads from each sensor, from each extremity, to a processor, look at the relationship of either the distance between the two markers on the ankles, in other words, stride length, or the amount of time, stationary, stance duration, and show those differences to the patient as a signal in the periphery of their Google Glass, where the goal is to equilibrate the stance durations or the distances between the two legs so the stride lengths are comparable. So this is an effort to create a novel intervention using contemporary technology. I tell you this because this project is just about complete. The students graduated 2 years ago, and they're still working on the project because of the level of enthusiasm that was born out of this level of mutual communication. So these are kind of exciting opportunities. Okay. So I'm proud to tell you that all of this effort that many people have been exercising for the last 4 years has evolved into an opportunity that the APTA Board of Directors provided to us this past February, a few weeks ago, in creating a council. We're one of the 4 councils now of the APTA that is designed to bring in together folks from different disciplines and leaders and those interested from sections of the APTA to work as a council to move this entire agenda forward. It's one of the few examples I know where both PTs and non-PTs will work together cohesively to create informational bases that we all can use. And the goal is for this to become self-sustaining so that beyond contributions from the APTA to get this going, the sections will want to participate as proactive financial supporters of this initiative. And the 4 areas that I showed you are not intended to be all inclusive, quite to the contrary. We envision time where other areas of importance will begin to fill some of the gaps, one of them being health services research and health services opportunities to demonstrate the value of what it is we're doing so that we can get paid for what, in fact, we do. So I've taken you on a journey here, and I want to finish by reading you my favorite poem, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, because I think what it embodies is this notion of seeking a direction in the front of the pack rather than behind, a vision for moving things forward. And for those of you not familiar with this poem, it goes as such. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I would like to think that a Marilyn Gossman would have embraced this kind of concept, that there is a way in which we must see beyond our immediacy, open our eyes to visions yet to unfold, and embrace roads that are not as yet taken. Thank you.
So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Wolf for a very inspiring talk. Visionaries such as yourself have clearly shaped our profession and continue to lead us into a bright future filled with change, challenge, and promise. And I'd like to throw back the vital comment at you. I think it's an apt descriptor of the person that you are. Visionary, inspirational, tenacious, articulate, loving, and passionate.
That's very sweet.
I am Diane Clark. I'm the program director for the UAB Doctor of Physical Therapy program. And on behalf of the UAB Department of Physical Therapy, I'd like to present you with a plaque commemorating your participation in the endowed Marilyn R. Gossman Lectureship for the Advancement of Physical Therapy. So this concludes our program for the evening. Thank you for being a part of this special event. Now we invite you to join us for a short reception to be held in the lobby. Thank you for coming.